What's going on, Helldivers? My name is Dadpool, and today's video we'll be going over the recent patch notes. We'll call this one 0.300. I'll pretty much be reading verbatim and giving some of my thoughts in the process. To start out, we have the overview for this patch. We made improvements and changes to weapon balances and the Spread Democracy mission. Now, if you don't know what the Spread Democracy mission is, this was the mission you did in your basic training with raising the Super Earth flag prior to receiving your Helldiver cape. Balancing armors with a rating over 100 will now reduce damage on headshots. I think this is a great change. I'm excited to have a better reason in wearing the beefcake armor you see me running in the background gameplay. Victory poses will now only play for the extracted. No stolen valor on my ship. That's great. Burning damage has been reduced by 15%. This shouldn't be too much of an issue offensively with the buff we got by 25% to our flamethrower, napalm, and mines in our ship module. I think it's a good change too, as burning was pretty unforgiving if you didn't react 0.1 second before stimming your HP back up. Moving on, we have our primary, secondary, and support weapon update. The CB Tech 9 exploding crossbow has slightly smaller explosion, increased stagger, decreased number of mags from 12 to 8, increased number of mags gain from resupply from 6 to 8, slight reduction in ergonomics, not sure what they mean by that, and increased muzzle velocity. For me, I don't really see anything that stands out to make me want to use this weapon. Maybe the smaller explosion will help prevent the user from exploding themselves as often, but for me, I personally don't enjoy using the crossbow. The LAS Tech 99 Quasar cannon got a nerf with an increase to its recharge time by 5 seconds. I still think there's a place for the Quasar cannon. I think the devs are trying to put this more in line with the reload speed times we're having for weapons such as the recoilless rifle. I think this is a healthy change, but I can see some kickback from players from this nerf. The BR Tech 14 Adjudicator received some love, with full auto being the default firing mode. They reduced its recoil, increased its mags from 6 to 8, increased the number of mags from resupply from 6 to 8, and it's now been placed amongst assault rifles. Now, my biggest complaint with this weapon was the lack of ammunition and its recoil, so I'm excited to give this assault rifle another try. The LAS Tech 98 laser cannon had its damage increase, but also reduced its damage versus large volume bodies. Now, I wish they were more specific with this change, as the description for me is conflicting. Hopefully we'll still be able to take down gunships as quickly as we were before this update. The SG Tech 8P Punisher Plasma had its maximum mags decreased from 12 to 8, increased its mags received from resupply from 6 to 8, and increased its projectile speed, decreased its damage fall off, and is now placed amongst the energy weapons. Now, my biggest complaint with the Punisher Plasma was the projectile speed, so I'll be excited to see how it is now that that is increased, as well as having less damage fall off from the explosion splash damage this weapon does. The Arc Tech 12 Blitzer got a buff. It increased their shots from 30 to 45 and now is placed in the energy weapons category. I'll be curious to try this weapon again, as I was unimpressed with its initial fire rate, as having an arc thrower was just overall better than running the Blitzer. The Artec 36 Eruptor got a nerf with its mags from 12 to 6, and its explosion damage drops off slightly faster. I still think this weapon will be prominently used, as it's very versatile at taking out objectives and larger enemies. Additionally, I do have a build guide with this weapon alongside the resupply pack, which should help keep up with the changes to this weapon's ammo economy. Link to that video will be in the description below. The LAS Tech 16 Sickle received a nerf to its mags from 6 to 3. This shouldn't really affect this weapon's use case, as long as the user is conscious of the overheat mechanic. The LAS Tech 5 Scythe got much needed buff to its damage from 300 to 350, and had its mags decreased from 6 to 4. Now, my biggest complaint with this weapon was its damage. I'll be curious to see if this will be a good primary to take out Devastators with a well-aimed headshot. The RS Tech 422 Railgun is regaining some of its previous glory with an increase to its armor pen in both safe and unsafe mode, but it will now have its stagger force reduced. I do miss how crazy this weapon's damage used to be. I'll be curious to see how fast we can take out big enemies such as our Bile Titans. The MG Tech 101 Heavy Machine Gun will now have the third-person crosshair enabled. Honestly, I didn't know this was a thing, as the recoil on this thing is so crazy that I always stay in first person when using. The 6.3 CS Diligence Counter Sniper had its damage increased from 128 to 140, and its ergonomics improved. Come to think of it, I believe that they're talking about the speed in which you can sway your weapon from left to right when they say ergonomics. Curious to see if the damage buff will increase this weapon's usage. The RTech 63 Diligence also received a damage buff from 112 to 125. The most popular sidearm, the P19 Redeemer, received a nerf with its increased recoil. I personally like using the single fire mode for the smaller infantry targets, as you can take them out without using so much ammo. The P-Tech 2 Peacemaker had its damage increased from 60 to 75. The P-Tech 8 Senator, the most aesthetically pleasing sidearm with its cowboy animations, had its damage increased from 150 to 175 and also received a speed loader. So when reloading from an empty cylinder, this will speed the reloading process. I think this is an amazing perk, and I will probably be using this in builds I'm typically choosing the Redeemer. The LAS Tech 7 Dagger had its damage increased from 150 to 200. I'll be curious to see if that offsets its current overheat mechanic. The AR Tech 19 Liberator had its damage increase from 55 to 60. The AR Tech 23C Liberator Concussive had its damage increased from 55 to 65. The JAR Tech 5 Dominator received a damage nerf from 300 to 275. I'll be curious to see if I can still headshot Devastators with one shot. The AX/AR Tech 23 Guard Dog, so I think they're actually adding both in the same name, as the Guard Dog Rover has the laser. And that's the LAS Tech 5, had its damage decreased by 30%. This is a pretty big nerf, and I can see why they did this, as the Rover is typically the person with the highest number of kills in most missions. The RL Tech 77 Airburst Rocket Launcher received some much needed changes to its detonation, as it was detonating when shot near almost anything. Additionally, it had its proximity radius reduced. I still have trust issues when I see this thing, but I'll be curious to see how its interactions are now with the changes. The A4/MG Tech 43 Machine Gun Sentry had its health increased to match other sentries. Honestly, I wasn't sure that was a thing already. The A4/ARC Tech 3 Tesla Tower had its health increased by 33%. I think the Tesla is amazing and it stays up forever already, so I like this change. The FAF Tech 14 Spear looks like it got a nerf, as it now has an added reload stage after spent missile is discarded. Hopefully they make changes to the Spear with its locking mechanism, as I like the weapon when it works, but it feels bad when it doesn't. Moving on to enemies, we have the Bile Spear and Nursing Spear movement speed slightly reduced. The Hulk's force required to stagger them was increased slightly. The Hulk Scorcher direct flamethrower damage is reduced by 20%. That is great. I hate dying by those very fast with the burning. The Devastator fire rate slightly increased, only the standard Devastator, so we're not talking about the rocket Devastators and not the ones with the shield. Gunship sideways movement slightly increased. It'll make it more intimidating for sure. Scout Strider Riders now less vulnerable to explosions. I'll be curious to see how Striders are affected by weapons such as the Eruptor, as it was a one-shot before the update. Fog Generators, so what they mean is the Spore Spears, their health and armor is increased. I'll be curious to see how many shots that takes to take down now. Gunship Spawners now have a much lower cap on how many gunships they can have active at the same time. Now, I personally think that's a good change and a balanced change, as the gunship sideways movement is now increased. Enemy patrols. Now, this is a big change for the solo divers out there, as patrols are now increased when there are fewer than 4 active players. Moving on to our gameplay changes, made a minor level generation improvement to how we distribute locations throughout the mission map. This should improve variation in distance between objectives, and objectives will likely not spawn as far away from each other as often as before. Now, I have had moments in which a Shrieker nest was on top of a Stalker nest, so I'm expecting to possibly see more of these types of scenarios. At its setting, it's in the options menu gameplay section to disable automatic climbing and vaulting while sprinting. Now, I'll definitely be checking out this setting, because every time a resupply comes down, I do end up vaulting over the resupply as opposed to taking a resupply. The Spread Democracy mission, otherwise known as the Raise the Flag, can now be enjoyed on higher difficulties for maximum freedom spreading. Really liking that change. When readying up, Helldivers now salute to ensure maximum democratic readiness. Nice little subtle change, as you'll be the only one standing there without saluting if you're not currently ready. Added ambiance to the Tremor Planetary Hazard to underline the severity so Helldivers can react accordingly. Not sure what they mean by that. I'll be curious to see when that happens. Shots that ricochet from heavy armored enemies will now properly hit the Helldiver who fired them. Trigger discipline is highly recommended. I'll be curious to see how the Stalwart, kind of affects that, as well as other machine guns when shooting the head of enemies such as your Charger. And that's pretty much all the important material I want to cover in this video. Now, there is a long list of crash, bug fixes, and known issues. If you're curious to what those are, I'll leave a link to those changes in the description below. If you enjoyed this video covering today's update 0.300, consider liking and subscribing and hitting that post notification bell to stay up to date with my future content. Thanks again, and take care, everybody.